So overtreatment means basically that you treat stuff that shouldn't be treated. But overdiagnosis is a term for the concept that happens when you diagnose something that you will never have a symptom from or you will never die from. And I'm not saying that we can completely get rid of overdiagnosis of overtreatment. That's probably an illusion. But right now, currently, we have so much overdiagnosis.
Hello and welcome to the Sustainable Healthcare Podcast. This is Joachim from Green Innovation Group, back here with another episode, the second episode with Alexandra Jønsson about overdiagnostics and overtreatment. And this episode we are looking more specifically at some of the diseases that we have a tendency to overdiagnose and overtreat. What does it look like in practical terms, and of course also how it's tied into sustainability. Why is overdiagnosing and overtreating a problem in terms of sustainability, CO2 emissions and material use? But it's also actually a problem, at least Alexandra makes that argument, for patient life, financially, and also just for clinical heads. It was an absolute joy to speak to Alexandra, and I look forward to doing so again. Do enjoy the episode. Welcome, Alexandra. Super exciting to have you on the Sustainable Healthcare Podcast.
Thank you very much.
In the previous episode, we talked a lot about healthism and how our health culture and individuality means that we have a tendency to use more healthcare than we need, and also feel that it's a moral obligation to say yes to all kinds of healthcare and also kind of max out on it. First of all, you have a book coming out.
Yes, I do.
Yeah. What's the book, and where can you get it, both in English and Danish? Yeah.
The book is coming out on 5th of September. In Danish, it's Snart er vi alle patienter, overdiagnostik i samfundsvidenskabelige og medicinske perspektiver. It's a samfundslitteratur. You can get it at 20% off if you're a student.
Yay!
And in English, that would be Someday Soon We Will All Be Patients. And it's actually the first ever textbook in the world on overdiagnosis and overuse. So there have been written a few books that are more have character of debate books, but this is actually a textbook. So what we're trying is also not to...
When you say textbook, is that you're combining a lot of scientific literature and like trying to make a more easily digestible...
Yeah, it's a textbook it's meant to be used at universities for teaching.
Yes.
Yes, so it's not a book that you would read and hopefully not detect my opinion on. Because I'm not here to promote any forms of particular healthcare. I like to talk about it from my point of view and in terms of my own research connected to sustainability. But overdiagnosis in itself is something that we're just trying to explain to people.
Yeah. So what is an overdiagnosis?
See, that's the thing, and I think that's when I got the idea for the book, was that as I am an anthropologist and so many of my social science colleagues working within the field of health are going to be the ones who becomes policymakers or deciding these things, and we don't know much about overdiagnosis. What we know is much reflected from the health culture that we discussed previously, that we should give people treatments and as much treatments as possible because we want to save lives. But overdiagnosis is a term for the concept that happens when you diagnose something that you will never have a symptom from or you will never die from. So it's you can talk about two forms of overdiagnosis: overdetection and overdefinition. And overdefinition would be the easiest form, because that is when we define something as a disease that isn't. And in the US...
What could that be, for instance?
So in the US there's a lot of examples. That could be road rage.
Okay.
You can buy...
Is that classified as a disease?
Yes, because you can buy pills against it.
Okay, wow.
So we are more strict in Europe and in particular in Denmark, but for instance, we have a suggestion to include the diagnosis of sarcopenia,
Which is?
The loss of muscles that comes naturally with age.
Okay.
So it's a premise of aging, and it's something that will happen to everybody. Maybe it happens to me at the age of 60 and to you at the age of 80 because I'm a woman or our bones are more fragile. But basically it's a natural process. And the people coming up with the diagnosis, I have to say that's how it happens, will say, well, it's important to get it diagnosed because then we can refer people to have watch programs if they should fall or have osteoporosis or something like that. And from my point of view, it's a classic example of overdefinition because it's a natural phenomena. So overdefinition is much about taking life premises, life circumstances that are common and medicalizing them. So sometimes you will hear the word...
So an extreme example would be like, getting gray hair is...
extreme sweat production is included in that as well. But again, we can't do that in Denmark, but we do have some of these. So if I should be provocative, I would also say, well, pre-diabetes, should that be a diagnosis? Is that really a disease? Because diabetes in itself is not what you die from. You die from the complications from diabetes. So you have a risk of dying for something.
Okay.
And there are pros and cons, and I'm not interested in giving my opinion on that, but there are definitely numerous examples of diseases that we can't really differ whether it's a disease or it's just a phenomena that is existing in all of our bodies.
So that was the one type of overdiagnosing, and the other
is the overdetection.
Yeah.
And this is the unpopular one, in particular in the healthcare sector, because we get so great technologies now, so many new instruments that can detect even smaller and smaller cases of, for instance, cancer. And that's good, isn't it? But the thing is that the smaller cancers we detect, the higher is the risk that these are cancers that would never develop. So what you need to know is that not all cancers will eventually develop. Some of them will just disappear of their own. Some of them will develop so slowly, as I told you, the analogy with animals, that it's like a turtle, and you will die from something else.
Basically, what we're looking at here with overdiagnosing is the thing that, first of all, it doesn't in some cases, diagnosing doesn't lead to better health or longer living necessarily. But also there's a discussion that needs to be had on that diagnosing in itself is not free, sustainability-wise, financially, and as a person as well. So how do we go about that? What would be a good way to have that conversation, you think? Or is it even a conversation that's being had right now? Maybe?
Well, if you'd asked me 10 years ago, I would have been the odd one standing out. And people would have rolled their eyes and saying, well, not necessarily. But there's an international society consisting of University of Copenhagen, University of Oxford, University of Dartmouth, and University of Sydney that has this society against overdiagnosis. And that international conversation has been reflected in the Danish conversation as well. So now with my upcoming book, I can say that the health authorities, the Danish National Health Board, has already pre-ordered the book and pre-ordered us to come speak about it. And
well
you
done.
will see, thank you, but you will see that in the past 3 or 4 years, among healthcare policymakers and medical doctors, this is a natural conversation. So we even had a couple of weeks ago, my co-author was in the news because they had found a new screening program. Isn't it wonderful? Let's implement it. And he would say, well, if you really want to do something about lung cancer, you should have people stop smoking.
Yeah.
And then the researcher promoting this screening program would say, well, we are just glad that it shows it works because otherwise we would just be overdiagnosing people. And that was interesting for me because then overdiagnosis had become a word that is in the vocabulary of
and it's actually a question that could be asked also outside of a specific overdiagnosing program.
Exactly. And in the Danish National Health Board, when you do the guidelines for treatments, are obligated to always also look at the harms, so not just the benefits but also the harms and the potential for overdiagnosis. And I'm not saying that we can completely get rid of overdiagnosis of overtreatment, that's probably an illusion, but right now, currently, we have so much overdiagnosis. And I want to give you an example that is easy to comprehend. So there's prostate cancer. When prostate cancer is in its worst, it's a horrible, horrible disease. It is very severe and you will most likely die from it and have tremendous pain, and it's a horrible disease. But out of the people diagnosed with prostate cancer, only 5% will develop the prostate cancer that should be treated like that because it potentially can kill you. Okay, 95 of the people will never have symptoms, or at least the symptoms that they have had are symptoms that are now, evidence have shown, not clearly connected to prostate cancer. So what happens is that they're treated for prostate cancer, and with the treatments, for instance, their sex lives get ruined because they're unable to get an erection.
I was going to ask that the cancer treatments can be very rough, even if it's not chemo, or they can still.
And it's not chemo. It's just so basically, in particular about the erection part and the loss of sexual desire, and there's a lot of other minor, you may say, side effects, but they're not minor if they're unnecessary to take the treatments. And luckily, I think, because you asked about the conversation and how it's been changing, this has now been implemented. So the reason why so many has been overdiagnosed is that we have a test that is called the PSA test, and it takes basically a number, and if that number it's called the Gleason score, and if that's very high, you're likely to have cancer. But the PSA testing will find so much cancer that isn't really cancer, so it overdiagnoses a lot of people. And until this summer, you should be taking PSA test if older men were presenting with their doctors and saying, you know, when I try to urinate, I don't urinate that much, or I have to stop. So in Danish we would call it slapstråle or stuff like that. And it's very, very common among men above the age of 60.
For all kinds of reasons.
Yes. And so the new guidelines has been made, and now that it's been decided that you do not take the PSA test if you only have these symptoms. So you have to have more severe symptoms, and you can do a physical examination. And then, because of course we should do something and try and treat those people who get the horrible, horrible prostate cancer. We just need to be open about the conversation that many of the men diagnosed with prostate cancer are not really ill and will never have symptoms and will never die from prostate cancer.
And that's the core of the conversation, right? That some of these diseases, for a lot of them, I mean, if you're one who gets it bad, I mean, it's horrible on an individual case, but we still need to have a discussion around that as a society in whatever healthcare systems that we have. So this was the overdiagnostic part, and then there's an overtreatment part as well, whereas I think one of the recent biggest global cases is, of course, COVID, where, and I don't know what's up and down, I'm not an expert, you probably don't know either, but back to the healthism and health being an absolute value in our society, I think it was quite interesting that in a lot of cases, people who spoke out against saying, hey, is this too much treatment, were classified as like tinfoil hat, not even skeptics, what's the word, conspiratories, so overtreatment, what is that? And
well, overtreatment is not, you can overtreat stuff that it's not overdiagnosis in itself, but overdiagnosis will naturally lead to overtreatment.
Yes.
So overtreatment means basically that you treat stuff that shouldn't be treated. And I don't know anything about the COVID either, but what I do know is, as you say, I didn't want to go into the public debate because I don't want to be associated with tinfoil heads. I'm a researcher and
Yeah, you would actually probably have been could have been a voice in that debate. I totally get why you didn't want to.
Yeah, because I was one of those who was like, but the evidence shows that masks don't have any effect. Why would we be wearing masks? And then I was just, putting my mask on, silencing myself. And that's what it's also, I'm so happy that you guys invited me in here, but I'm also a little bit scared of what is going to happen, because I am talking against so many people's belief that the more treatment, the better. And the more diagnosis, the better.
Well, we are working very hard to get a lot of people to listen to the Sustainable Healthcare podcast, but it's not that big yet, so I don't think. But hopefully we are a stepping stone to you getting on the TV programs.
So another part of the overdiagnosis is also with the whole mental disease part. Yeah. And in the book, I just want to state that we don't really talk a lot about the mental diseases. We're very much about the somatic, the physical diseases, and that's because other researchers such as Sven Brinkmann and Anders Petersson, the late Anders Petersson, has written quite a few books on mental diagnosis, and I agree with their argument. So we're very much in line with them, but we're just looking at it because for some lay people, it's easier to comprehend that mental diseases can be overdefined.
Yeah. So that would be basically that either that we're saying a lot of people who have depression that don't have it in a clinical sense, or we are coming up with terms that don't really correspond to something that we can classify as a medical disease.
Exactly. So what we see is that the thresholds for getting a depression diagnosis has been widened. So more people will be diagnosed with depression. What is interesting though is that that's easy to comprehend, but it's also the case with high blood pressure. So if you have a blood pressure in Denmark that's not too high, you can go to the US and it will be too high. So it's a political decision. And it's also scary, even when I tell people WHO, which I have a very nice collaboration with, is a political organization. It's not an evidence-based organization necessarily. They have other interests.
Chinese medicine and other analogs.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's perhaps an interesting point as well, that we tend to have a very binary view on diseases, like you're depressed, you're not depressed. You have breast cancer, you don't have breast cancer. And then there are two boxes. It's sort of easy to understand, and also like for identity-wise, now I'm in this, or now I didn't have. Whereas if you dig deeper, like you have done, what we will find is that it's much more gray and muddy. And then we've installed threshold values that if you're above 10 on this scale, or if you can answer yes to 4 out of 6 questions, or whichever, or if these 3 numbers combined give a score of, and then you're in the box. But of course, a threshold value that we have set could be different. And is different from country to country and changes over time.
Exactly. So it's a continuum. And even for cancer nuts, we have to have a threshold for when is this too big enough to be decided to be a cancer nut.
Do they differ between countries, some of these? Or
I actually don't know that.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
So that's the researcher question usually. I don't know. Yeah, but we do know that it differs politically, for instance, when you are to participate in screening programs. And we spoke briefly about the mammography screening program.
The breast cancer.
Yes, exactly. And in Denmark, as I said, it's for women between the age of 50 and 69. And you will see different ages included in Sweden and in Norway. Okay. And I'm not that interested about the ages. I'm interested in how did that decision come about, because then it's not based on knowledge. It's not solid knowledge, solid evidence that we can say, wow, this age and this age. Then it really helps. What is also interesting when it comes to the screening part is that mammography screening, the breast cancer screening, is likely to have less effect now because we have been. So we are now so good at treating breast cancer.
So when you say now, compared to 20 years ago,
or 10 years ago, or 5 years ago, the treatment has really, really, really increased in effectiveness. So the
we don't need to detect it as early to fix it.
No, maybe you should put it more in numbers, that the number of women saved from dying from breast cancer, from participating in a breast screening program, will be even less because the treatments are so good. So even if they're not in the screening program, they can still be saved because treatments are good. And that's how we usually would say, we will say the number needed to treat, the NNT. How many people do we need to treat to save one? And that number is very, very high. And I'm not going to give you the number because people vary on that definition. And is it within a year, or if you look at it at a lifespan of 5 years? So it's all about also manipulating numbers.
Yeah, of course, there's at least always unconscious self-interest to divert resources and prestige to a given area. That's true for all of us.
Exactly.
And at the core of it, and I mean, we're going to say then, okay, why are we sitting here talking on the Sustainable Healthcare podcast? Well, that is basically because, I mean, we have an unsustainable healthcare system in a lot of different ways. And one of the narratives that I've been speaking a lot about as well is this sick care versus preventive healthcare stigma, that we first fix things when people are sick. And that's more expensive in CO2 materials and also financially and clinical personnel as well. And I really like that you're challenging this perspective as well. That is, I mean, contrary to that as well, we have a saying that we also like to use with our clients, that, I mean, the most sustainable treatment is the one that we never have to do. So that corresponds quite well with the overdiagnosing.
Exactly.
So could you put some words on just at a general level in terms of sustainability, environmental? Why is this a problem?
I think
that we are overdiagnosing and overtreating.
I think I'd like to put some numbers on it.
Yes,
I think they're
awesome.
important.
Even better.
Yeah, and these numbers are quite important.
Yes.
So you need to remember them. As I told you, there's a study coming out this year that shows that 80% of the carbon emissions from healthcare sector is not from the buildings and the materials. 80% of it is from the treatments that we do. So most of the emissions, one could say quite fairly, comes from the treatments and the actions, everything that we do in healthcare. Preventive, treatment, palliative treatment, all of these kind of things. That's the first number. The second number is that, and this may come as a shock to people who haven't heard it before, but it's quite acknowledged worldwide that it's what we call the 60-30-10, which means that 60% of the treatments that we do in the healthcare section is effective, they're needed, they have more benefits than harms. 30% of the treatments that we do are not effective. They just don't work. And 10% of the treatments that we do have more harms than benefits, so they're not effective and they harm people.
Yeah, wow.
And that's quite large numbers if you hold that up to the treatments.
Passing through EMA and FDA with the safety and efficiency criteria, the FDA and EMA are the organizations that approves treatments and medicine. Yeah.
So what I'm saying is that, as I told you, we might not get rid of overdiagnosis completely, but if we could reduce overdiagnosis to, say, even 10% of, for instance, breast cancer screenings, then we would reduce, where the current numbers are 50% of the cancer screening breast cancers are overdiagnosed. And if we go with that number, then we would reduce the cancers diagnosed with 40%, which would mean that we could save so much carbon emission. Not to say also save people from being patients and all of the financial costs, but if you look at it,
clinical personnel that could be used better. And,
yes. And then we need to stop medicalizing common life states. Because people are getting older and they do have more diseases.
We don't like that.
No, but you see, the thing is that a lot of our pharmacists are actually working on polypharmacy, saying that, well, do we need to treat high blood pressure among the oldest, 80 plus? High cholesterol, is that even a problem? Going back to the thresholds that are decided for high cholesterol and high blood pressure are actually made up on a 25-year-old. Okay. So because we haven't done the medical research, the RCTs, randomized controlled trials on old people, we've done it on young people. You will also hear feminists, I'm a feminist myself, but you will hear feminist scholars saying that that's also why it's a problem that we haven't done enough of the biomedical research on female bodies. And then you would also add and the different races, so there are racial inequalities as well. But basically what I'm saying is that the thresholds are still politically made. And again, it's not my opinion that's interesting. What I care about is the evidence.
Yeah.
And then as an anthropologist, people would usually go like, well, evidence, that is just about the biomedical and laboratory stuff, but it's not. So evidence-based medicine has 3 principles of evidence, which is best clinical evidence, means that you are gaining the best studies that has been. And if you can get a Cochrane systematic review of RCTs, that's the top highest. But you will get whatever you can get your hands on.
Could you just explain to our listeners briefly what that is?
A Cochrane is a particular type of systematic review in which you have to look through all the research that's been done all over the world, for instance, on breast cancer screening, and then you will have to scrutinize that research and look for biases and look for the methods, because you would be surprised on how many bad studies are performed. But some of them are good as well, and then you do a Cochrane report, and it takes between 1 and 3 years to do such one Cochrane review. So, and it's called Cochrane because it was started by Arthur Cochrane back in the 60s as an opposition to what we call the GOPSAT, the good old boys sitting around a table. And don't laugh, because that's how it used to be. Old white men sitting with their medical doctors' capes on, saying like, I think that we should be treating this disease with the disease because it sounds reasonable to me.
And when you're saying that's how it used to be, that's not 200 years ago before the car was invented. That's
no, it was in 40s, 50s, yeah. And then Cochrane started saying we need to have systematic reviews of evidence. Also because just because it's published in a journal doesn't mean that we can rely on it. We need to scrutinize the evidence, scrutinize the methods and the biases and the results and so on and so forth. As you also said something about relative risk and absolute risk. It's a way that people can manipulate with numbers. I'm not saying that any of our current health scholars are interested in manipulating, but it's also the way that we are presenting our results.
Yeah, and we are humans at the center.
Yes.
So what are the other two evidences?
So the other 2 evidences is the clinical expertise. So if you're a medical doctor or a nurse or something, you will have some expertise, and you will also know what are the clinical circumstances. So am I looking at COVID-19 in a regular population, at an old person or a young person or whatever? And then the last one is the patient preferences and the knowledge on the patient's life, and because that matters as well. And I'd like to add to that also the societal thing. So what we talk about healthism is also when you do perform evidence-based, when you practice evidence-based medicine, you need to take the clinical evidence into mind, your clinical expertise, but also the patient's point of view and the society. And you will know that the patient will say, well, can you give me the treatment because I want to be sure. Or I think I should have taken this test and this test.
And then there's everything that happens, like there's still quite little line of sight. It keeps surprising me in healthcare, like how little is known of how the patients actually use their medicine or other treatments in their everyday life. Like how is it stored? Do they take it with the right frequency? All these kind of things. Are they taking other things at the same time? Or
do they understand it? I did in my PhD. I realized that many informations regarding that, the adherence we would call how people would follow a treatment, is well, they don't want to disclose it to the doctors if it makes them look in a bad light.
Yeah,
so
of course.
And if you're an older lady and the last kind of thing that you can perform adulthood in, going back to our society where adulthood is a great value, then you don't want to expose that you're unable to differ between the pills and you get confused and so on, because that is, you're still an adult
then
taking
you're
care of
losing
yourself.
identity and independence. And
that's not so much about sustainability, except we know that many of the older patients take too much medicine. And you will see...
But that's also unsustainability.
Yes, and so too much medicine is also an initiative, and we see that in Denmark as well. So I am very fond of the too much medicine. In Danish it's called vel klogt. My only critic of that would be that it puts the pressure on the patient and the doctor, so they need to have a conversation. And
not the system and the structure,
If you have a political and a societal system that offers mammography screening, then it's very much on to ask an individual to really scrutinize. If you're a trained public school teacher, you have a quite high educational level, but are you able to really understand the evidence? And our study shows that, well, you are not.
No, of course not. I mean, that's a whole dedicated education cycle of decades to actually be able to do that.
So I really applaud the too much medicine, the vel klogt. I'm just saying that we need to look at the systemics, the structural, all of these things, because it's the big decisions that really create the carbon emissions.
Overdiagnosing is a problem. Overtreatment is a problem.
Overuse.
It's a big sustainability issue as well. Besides the financial cost, the clinical personnel cost, the patient cost, it also just means that we are spending a lot of material and CO2 that we don't really get anything for. That's the worst part, that we are emitting the CO2, but we actually not living longer and better. I really like this 60-30-10, that 60% of the treatment works as supposed, 30% of the treatment doesn't work, and 10% are actually harmful. So what do we do? What's your best advice? I know it's going to be something about structural things. And
it is. So vel klogt it's a good campaign asking people to be more critically thinking. Maybe I think one of the titles for one of the other books on overdiagnosis that is not a scientific book, it's more a debate book. It's called "Should I be tested for cancer? Maybe not, and here's why." And so people could inform themselves, but basically it all comes back to the medical society advising the policymakers, advising the politicians to be brave enough to withdraw some of the healthcare that we offer, which would also leave more resources for the people who need it the most. And I'm just thinking it could be within the mental health care, that would be the psychiatry really needs attention.
Definitely. So if you're a private company, you're a medtech company, you're a pharma company, what can you take away from this, and how can you help this societal needed improvement?
Well, it's all about being aware of societal responsibility and sustainability responsibilities, because any company would want to make money and would want to sell pills. But you could ask yourself then, how can we be more responsible in terms of not working against evidence if evidence shows that we don't need as many patients suffering from this disease, for instance. And we are getting more and more diseases, so it's not that they will go financially ruined, but it's a difficult question to ask them. I would like to see if the medical companies, at least in Denmark, would take an action against overdiagnosis. Would say that this is the disease and we need to look at the threshold so that we don't medicalize people unnecessary, which means a potential loss of sales, but on the other hand, a more sustainable future. Because
but long term, it could also mean that maybe, I mean, if they're looking at their portfolios of treatments or medicine, I mean, it could redirect some of their research and production resources towards other things. Because I mean, there's if you're a pharmaceutical company, there's a much larger list of potential drugs and treatments that you could do than you actually do. And that's a combination of, I mean, what does the market look like? What can we actually get through FDA and demonstrate effectiveness on? And so I think just having that in that conversation and say, hey, maybe we should put some more points on this treatment over here in terms of our prioritization.
And cry out to the medical tech companies and to the engineers. Don't put so much effort into making the machines even more precise, because they're precise enough. They're too precise, actually.
That's
look
very
into
interesting too.
Yes. Why don't you look into making it more environmental, having less carbon emissions, using better material, all of the things that you could do with your machines that are working fine. Crying out to all of the small private companies and all of the engineers making apps, for instance, to scan your skin. We have a tsunami of overdiagnosis coming from people scanning their skins and thinking that they have mole cancer in moles.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yes, because that's so interesting with this overtreatment, overdiagnosis thing. That it's sort of it challenges some of the other views in terms of what can help with sustainability and other things in terms of preventive healthcare, and also just in remote care in general, that we are getting access to so many new things and biometrics from our iPhones and heart rate monitors. We wear rings and other stuff, and some of it is good and useful, but it also just potentially leads to massive overdiagnosing.
And the market is irregulated as it is now. Yeah. So we don't know about the effects, we don't know about the effectiveness, we don't know about the
At least for the personal things we do in the apps we download ourselves. It's wow. So I think we need to wrap up now, but we could talk for hours, and I already have other episode ideas. Thank you so much for coming, Alexandra. I think this is a really important part of the discussion.
I think I would like to say that if people listen and say, well, I'm pretty sure that she's got that wrong, I would just encourage people to read the book. It's also in libraries, because there it is explained in details that I can't go into here. And it's explained in graphs and numbers and references and all of that.
And you wrote the book, soon we will all be patients, with a medical doctor
who's a professor of medicine, yes.
Yeah, very nice. So go buy the book, everyone who's out there.
Or read it at the library.
I'll read it at the library.
Yes.
Thank you so much for coming,
Thank you.
Alexandra. Any other last messages?
No, thank you for being brave enough to invite me in. I know that...
I didn't know that was being brave. Maybe that was...
Well, I think jump on my wagon now, because I got a really good point, and more and more people are getting aware of it, and we can actually do something ourselves.
I think the key is just to have overdiagnosis and overtreatment being part of the discussion, and making it more granular, and not saying no, then we shouldn't do any diagnosing or any treatment,
that's
or not use, and that's not your point as well. But I mean, like all good research, look at where's the evidence. Thank you so much for coming, Alexandra. It was a wonderful conversation.
Thank you for having me.
I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, check out Alexandra's book, Soon We Will All Become Patients. If you're sitting out there and have some sustainability issues in your organization, reach out to us at Green Innovation Group. We work across the whole value chain, so both R&D, clinical, production, and commercial. Thanks for listening in, and in general, just really thank you to everybody who's listening. We don't really know who it is out there, but it's really a pleasure to be able to share the knowledge and excitement that we have for sustainability in the healthcare industry, regardless of if we do projects with people or not. So thank you for that, and have a good day.